Fix this and I'll give you my mansion, scoffed the CEO, but the genius son of the black maid solved it right away. Richard Blackstone held the destroyed smartphone aloft like a war trophy, his arrogant smile echoing through the panoramic 47th floor office. The top-of-the-line device had fallen from his desk during a tense meeting and now displayed a completely shattered screen, exposed circuits, and a swollen battery. Look at this, he continued, addressing the executives around the conference table. $3,000 thrown in the trash. I bet even the geniuses in the IT department can't resurrect this little beauty. From the corner of the room, where he was quietly organizing scattered papers, David Santos, only 16 years old, watched the scene with a calmness that contrasted with the chaos around him. The son of Sao, the maid who had been cleaning that office for 15 years, he was only there to help his mother during school vacations. Hey kid, Richard pointed directly at David, completely ignoring the visible discomfort of the other executives. Your mother always says you're a little Einstein, right? How about showing us what you can do? A heavy silence fell over the room. David was 16, but his eyes carried a maturity that came from years of watching his mother being treated as invisible by people like Richard. Sao, in the hallway, stopped dusting and felt her stomach tighten as she heard the taunt. If you can fix my cell phone, Richard continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm, I swear on my fortune that I'll give you my mansion in Beverly Hills. But when you fail, and you will fail, I want your mother to stop filling our ears with these fantastical stories about her prodigal son. The executives exchanged awkward glances, but none dared to intervene. Richard was known for his cruel tests on employees he considered inferior. David walked slowly to the table, his worn sneakers making noise against the Italian marble. He picked up the shattered smartphone and examined it with the patience of a surgeon analyzing a critical patient. His fingers, calloused from helping his father with small repairs in the neighborhood, delicately touched the exposed circuits. Mr. Blackstone, David said, his voice firm despite his young age, before I accept your challenge, I need you to confirm your promise in front of all these executives. The Beverly Hills mansion will be ours if I fix your phone now, correct? Richard laughed, clapping his hands. My God, what confidence. Of course, kid. In front of everyone here. My mansion, valued at $12 million, will be yours if you bring this cell phone back to life in the next 5 minutes. What Richard couldn't have known was that this simple teenager had built working computers from discarded parts, and that his true passion for electronics had been secretly cultivated for years. David smiled inwardly as he quickly identified that the problem wasn't in the main circuits, but in a loose connection that anyone with basic knowledge could repair, if they knew exactly where to look. While Richard continued to joke with the executives about teaching the kid his place, David worked with surgical precision. His hands moved with a confidence that made some of those present realize that they might be about to witness something extraordinary. Sao, watching everything from the hallway, gripped the cloth tightly. She knew that determined look on her son's face. It was the same one he had when he decided to build a working radio at age 12 using only electronic waste. If you're feeling that tension growing in your chest, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what's about to happen will show you that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake of your life. And the confident smile that was beginning to form on David's lips suggested that he knew something that everyone else there was yet to discover. Are you seeing this? Richard continued his provocation, addressing the executives as if David were a circus animal about to perform a trick. The cleaning lady's son is going to teach us about technology. What an interesting time we live in. Laughter echoed through the office, but David kept his eyes fixed on the device. Each exposed circuit told a story that only he seemed able to read. His hands moved with precision as he internally mapped each damaged component. You know what, kid, Richard approached, his expensive whiskey breath invading David's personal space. Your mother has been working here for 15 years cleaning up the mess that important people like us make. And in all that time, she only talks about you. The genius son, the little Einstein from the suburbs. I always thought it was the fantasies of a mother desperate to give some meaning to the mediocre life she chose. David didn't respond, but his hands paused for a fraction of a second. In the hallway, Sao felt tears burn her eyes. 15 years cleaning up after drunk executives, putting up with jokes about her accent, being treated like furniture, also David could have a better education. Keep going, David muttered to himself, resuming his work with renewed determination. Richard walked to the panoramic window, gesturing theatrically. Do you know how much it costs to maintain this charity? Conceição earns more here than any domestic worker in the city. And why? Because I am a generous man. But generosity has its limits. Michael Stevens, the vice president of finance, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He knew the payroll figures. Conceição earned exactly minimum wage, working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Mr. Blackstone, David looked up for the first time, his calm voice cutting through the laughter. You said your mansion is worth $12 million, correct? That's right, kid. $12 million. More than your entire family will earn in several lifetimes. Richard patted his chest proudly. I bought it from the widow of an oil tycoon who needed cash fast. A bargain, really. David nodded, turning his attention back to his smartphone. What no one there knew was that this teenager had spent years studying electronics not just out of passion, but out of necessity. When his father lost his job 3 years ago, David started repairing electronic devices in the neighborhood to help with household expenses. His first customer was Mrs. Carmen, an 80-year-old woman whose netbook had broken down just when she needed to access her retirement funds online. David discovered that the problem was simple, a poorly connected power cable, but the solution that local technicians offered would cost more than the value of the device. Never let anyone convince you that a problem is more complicated than it really is, his father had said that night. Powerful people love to complicate simple things to keep others dependent. Now examining Richard's smartphone, David quickly identified that the seemingly catastrophic damage was actually the result of 3 minor problems that appeared serious when combined: a displaced battery, a loose flat cable, and surface oxidation on the main contacts. Any experienced technician would know exactly what to do. 2 minutes left, Richard announced, checking his Rolex. I hope you're prepared for failure, kid. It's going to be an important lesson about knowing your place in the world. Jennifer Walsh, Director of Human Resources, watched the scene with growing discomfort. Over the past few months, she had noticed how Richard treated lower-level employees, always with a cruelty disguised as life lessons. But she had never witnessed anything so explicitly humiliating. David worked methodically, his fingers navigating the components with the confidence of someone who had faced much worse challenges with infinitely fewer resources. He remembered the time he managed to resurrect the community library's computer using parts from 3 different machines, allowing dozens of children to continue to have access to the internet. 30 seconds, Richard practically sang, clearly relishing what he believed to be imminent humiliation. What a shame, kid. Your mother will be so disappointed when she finds out that her fantasies about you were just that, fantasies. It was at that moment that something changed in the office air. The executives noticed that David showed no signs of panic or despair. On the contrary, there was a serenity in his movements that suggested something none of them had considered. What if the boy really knew what he was doing? Conceição, still watching from the hallway, recognized that focused expression. It was the same one David had at age 12 when he built a working radio from components he found in electronic waste. The same one he had at 14 when he hacked into the school system to show that grades were being manipulated against lower-income students. Time's up. Richard clapped his hands, breaking the silence. Well, what a surprise. Another dream shattered by reality. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important meetings with people who actually... But his words were interrupted by a sound no one expected to hear, the distinctive ring of an iPhone turning on for the first time. On the previously completely dark screen, the Apple logo shone in all its glory, followed by the startup animation that everyone knew so well. The smartphone, which moments before had seemed beyond repair, was coming back to life as if it had never been damaged. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stared at the device with the expression of someone who had just seen a ghost. The executives exchanged incredulous glances. Jennifer Walsh covered her mouth with her hands. And David, still holding the perfectly functioning cell phone, looked up at Richard with a smile that carried decades of wisdom concentrated into 16 years of life. Each new humiliation had only fueled something inside him that his oppressors couldn't see, a quiet determination strengthened by the very injustice they tried to impose. What those privileged people didn't know was that each act of contempt was sealing a fate they themselves had chosen, and now all that remained was to find out if Richard Blackstone was truly a man of his word, or if his arrogance would lead him to make an even bigger mistake. The smartphone working perfectly in David's hands created a silence that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the office. Richard stared at the device as if he were seeing a ghost, his face alternating between paleness and redness. Well, Richard cleared his throat, reaching out to retrieve his cell phone. Of course it worked. It was probably just the battery that was dead. Anyone can do that kind of repair. Jennifer Walsh rose abruptly from her chair. Mr. Blackstone, excuse me, but we all saw the state of that device. The circuits were exposed, the screen completely shattered. Jennifer, you don't understand electronics, Richard cut in, his voice losing its previous softness. It was a simple repair that any basic technician could do. It has nothing to do with that absurd promise I made in jest. David remained motionless, watching Richard struggle with his own words. Conceição, still in the hallway, felt her heart race as she realized that her son had achieved something impossible, but Richard was clearly trying to escape his responsibilities. A joke. Michael Stevens, the vice president of finance, consulted his notes. Mr. Blackstone, you said, I swear on my fortune in front of all of us. You were very specific about the Beverly Hills mansion valued at $12 million. Michael, you're taking this too seriously, Richard forced a nervous laugh. Obviously, it was hyperbole. No one would bet a mansion on a basic electronic repair. It was at that moment that David finally spoke, his voice carrying a calmness that made everyone present pay attention. Mr. Blackstone, you're right. It was a very simple repair. Richard visibly relaxed, thinking David was offering him a dignified way out. Exactly. See? The boy himself admits that. So simple, David continued, that anyone with basic knowledge could have solved it in minutes. Which makes me wonder, why couldn't you? And why couldn't your specialized technicians? The question hung in the air like a sharp blade. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, beginning to realize that this teenager was not the helpless victim Richard had imagined. Or maybe, David took a step forward. You knew exactly what the problem was from the beginning and just wanted to create a situation to publicly humiliate my mother and me. Richard's blood boiled. How dare this kid question his motives? Listen here, kid. I think you and your mother had better know your place. One little joke doesn't mean you're going to walk out of here with. I recorded everything, David interrupted softly, holding up his own smartphone. From the moment you made the promise until now. I recorded your specific promise, your comments about my mother, and your attempt to go back on your word. The office fell so silent that you could hear the air conditioning humming. Richard felt the world spinning around him. In the midst of the digital age, he had completely forgotten that anyone could be recording. Furthermore, David continued, his voice gaining a confidence that contrasted with his young age, my father is Miguel Santos. You may know him better as Miguel Santos Law Firm, specializing in labor law and workplace discrimination. Jennifer Walsh covered her mouth to hide a smile. She was well aware of Miguel Santos' reputation, one of the most respected labor lawyers in the city, famous for his cases against companies that practiced discrimination. Coincidentally, David continued, my father has been working on a very interesting case over the past few months. Something about a company that systematically pays below-average wages to Black and Latino employees, while offering superior benefits to white executives. The documents he has collected are quite revealing. Richard felt the ground open up beneath his feet. How could that kid know about the company's wage practices? And more importantly, how had Miguel Santos gained access to internal information? What Richard didn't know was that Conceição, during her 15 years cleaning offices, had overheard conversations she should never have heard. Executives openly discussing how to keep certain types of employees in subordinate positions. Comments about hiring diversity but maintaining quality. Jokes about quotas and affirmative action. And Conceição, whom Richard had always treated like furniture, had a photographic memory for injustices. But don't worry, Mr. Blackstone, David said, putting his phone back in his pocket. I don't intend to use this information unfairly. I just wanted to make sure you would honor your word about the mansion, as any man of integrity would. Michael Stevens cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mr. Blackstone, perhaps it would be better if we discussed this in private. No, David interrupted him gently. I think the conversation should continue right here, in front of the same people who witnessed the original promise. Transparency is fundamental in business, isn't it? Richard looked around the office, noticing that every executive present was visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Some avoided his gaze, others nervously checked their phones. The atmosphere had completely changed. He was no longer the predator, but the prey. Besides, David added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, My mother always taught me that when someone gives their word in front of witnesses, especially important people like all of you, that word is worth more than any contract. Conceição, still watching from the hallway, felt tears of pride burn her eyes. Her son had grown up watching her being humiliated and disrespected by people like Richard. But unlike her, who had to accept it silently to keep her job, David had learned to turn that experience into something completely different. Richard realized he was cornered. A recording of his promise, witnesses present, and now the veiled threat of exposure of the company's discriminatory practices. Worse still, the son of the maid he had completely underestimated was conducting the whole situation with a mastery that would make experienced executives jealous. Of course, Richard finally said, his voice sounding strained. A man always honors his word. But we'll need time to prepare all the legal documentation for the transfer of ownership. I understand perfectly, David nodded. Would 15 days be a reasonable time frame? My father always says that important real estate transactions deserve the time necessary to be done properly. The mention of my father made Richard gulp again. Every word David spoke sounded like a small threat wrapped in courtesy, and he was beginning to realize that he had seriously underestimated not only the boy, but the entire Santos family. Jennifer Walsh watched with fascination as David controlled the entire situation without ever raising his voice or showing aggression. It was a lesson in leadership she would never see in the most expensive business schools in the country. 15 days, Richard agreed reluctantly, realizing he had no choice. But this stays between us, obviously. There's no need to. Oh, but of course I'm going to tell everyone, David exclaimed with genuine enthusiasm. A story like this deserves to be shared. The generous CEO who offered his mansion to a maid's son after a simple repair. What an inspiring lesson in recognizing talent regardless of social background. David's smile was angelic, but his eyes shone with a calculating intelligence that made Richard realize he was dealing with someone far more dangerous than he had imagined. The boy had turned a humiliating situation into a narrative of corporate generosity, but in a way that would make it impossible for Richard to back down without looking exactly what he was, a prejudiced man without his word. As the executives began to disperse in awkward silence, David remained in the center of the office with the same serene calm he had maintained throughout the confrontation. But now there was something different in his gaze, the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just turned around a game that seemed lost from the start. Conceição finally entered the office to collect her cleaning supplies, and for the first time in 15 years, Richard Blackstone couldn't look her in the eye. What he couldn't know was that this had not been an isolated victory, but only the first move in a much larger plan that David had been devising for months, observing and learning from every humiliation his mother had suffered in silence. And as Richard tried to process how he had completely lost control of the situation to a teenager, a question began to torment him. If David Santos was capable of planning and executing such a sophisticated turnaround at 16, what else would he be capable of doing with a $12 million mansion and the public attention that this story would inevitably attract? 3 days after the promise in the office, Richard Blackstone believed he had found the perfect solution. Sitting in his Mercedes convertible on his way to the most expensive law firm in town, he mentally rehearsed the speech that would dismantle the whole charade. "Thompson, I need you to nullify a verbal contract made under duress," he said on the phone to his personal lawyer. "A minor extorted me using illegal recordings. We have precedents to invalidate this completely." What Richard didn't know was that, at that very moment, Miguel Santos was in the newsroom of the city's largest newspaper, accompanied by Jennifer Walsh and Michael Stevens, who had sought out the lawyer on their own after witnessing the humiliation in the office. "I have documented 15 years of systematic discrimination," Miguel explained to investigative journalist Clara Mendoza, spreading dossiers across the table. Race-based pay differentials, promotions denied based on cultural fit, strategic firings of employees who questioned these practices. Jennifer Walsh, visibly nervous, nodded in agreement. "I managed human resources. I received direct instructions from Mr. Blackstone to keep certain people in subordinate positions. I have emails, internal memos, recordings of meetings." Michael Stevens added, "The financial data clearly shows that white employees earned, on average, 40% more than black and Latino employees in the same positions." Richard justified this as qualification differences, but we have evidence that more qualified candidates were systematically rejected. Meanwhile, Richard arrived at the Blackstone Industries office convinced that he was in control of the situation. He called his legal department with precise instructions. "I want to file a lawsuit against Miguel Santos for extortion." and fire Conceição Santos immediately for involvement in blackmail. He had barely hung up the phone when his assistant rushed in. "Mr. Blackstone, there's a reporter from Channel 7 who wants to talk to you about discrimination in the workplace." Richard felt his blood run cold. What discrimination? Tell her we have no comment. "Sir," the assistant swallowed hard. "She said she has internal documents from our company. And she has people from our team with her." Through the panoramic window, Richard saw a news van parked in front of the building. Reporters were adjusting equipment as a crowd began to form on the sidewalk. His perfectly controlled world was falling apart in real time. The phone rang. It was Thompson, his lawyer. "Richard, you didn't tell me that this Miguel Santos is the same guy who won the billion-dollar case against Petrocorp last year. He specializes in class action lawsuits for discrimination. And he has an impeccable reputation." "Thompson, that's irrelevant. He's using his underage son to—" "Richard," Thompson interrupted him, "I just received a subpoena. Miguel Santos is filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of all Black and Latino employees of your company over the past 15 years. He has evidence, witnesses, internal documents. This is going to cost hundreds of millions in damages." Richard dropped the phone. Hundreds of millions. His company, his empire, his reputation, all being torn apart not by an inconvenient teenager, but by one of the most feared labor lawyers in the country. At that moment, David Santos calmly entered the Blackstone Industries building, accompanied by his father and a bailiff. Conceição walked beside her son, for the first time in 15 years not carrying cleaning supplies, but wearing a simple suit and the dignity of someone who would finally see justice done. "Mr. Blackstone," David greeted him politely when they arrived at the panoramic office. "I've come to formalize our conversation about the mansion. My father has prepared all the necessary documentation." Richard looked at Miguel Santos, a man of medium height, gray hair, modest suit, but whose eyes carried the determination of decades of fighting injustice. "You can't be serious. That was a joke between your son and me." "Mr. Blackstone," Miguel replied with the same calmness David had shown, "my son recorded your specific promise in front of multiple witnesses. But that's the least of your problems right now." Miguel opened his briefcase and spread documents across Richard's desk. 15 years of evidence of systematic discrimination. Emails from you instructing dismissals based on race. Memoranda about maintaining controlled diversity. Recordings of meetings where you referred to Black employees as social responsibility quotas. Richard's face changed from disbelief to pure terror. How did you get this?" "Conceição," David replied simply. "For 15 years, my mother cleaned this office while you openly discussed your discriminatory strategies. You treated her like furniture, forgetting that she has ears. And an exceptional memory." Conceição finally spoke, her voice firm despite years of forced silence. "Every racist joke, every comment about keeping certain types of employees subordinate, every meeting planning how to circumvent labor laws. I heard it all. And I remembered it all. But that's illegal. Recording without consent." Miguel smiled for the first time. "Mr. Blackstone, check your own employment contracts. Every employee, including Conceição, signed authorizations allowing recordings for security and training purposes. Your own documents legalized our collection of evidence." Richard looked desperately around the office, searching for an exit that didn't exist. Through the window, he saw more news vans arriving. His phone rang incessantly with calls from shareholders, business partners, and the press. "The mansion," David said gently, "was just the beginning. We wanted to make sure you would honor at least one promise before we revealed the rest." "The rest?" Richard whispered. Miguel opened another folder. Class action lawsuit representing 847 employees. Damages estimated at $340 million. And since the discrimination was systematic and documented, we expect the court to impose exemplary penalties that could double that amount. David watched Richard slowly process the magnitude of what was happening. "Mr. Blackstone, you always said my mother should know her place. Today she is knowing her place, on the right side of justice." The bailiff formally served the summons to Richard, who received it with trembling hands. 15 years of arrogance, prejudice, and abuse of power were being called into account in a single devastating afternoon. Sao looked around the office where she had been humiliated for so many years one last time. Mr. Blackstone, you don't need to worry about finding another maid. Starting today, this office will have new owners. As the Santos family left the building with dignity, Richard Blackstone remained alone in his crumbling empire, finally understanding that he had underestimated not only an intelligent teenager, but an entire family that had turned 15 years of accumulated injustice into the most calculated and devastating lesson in humility he could ever imagine. Outside, cameras captured David, Miguel, and Sao Santos leaving the building with their heads held high, as the future opened up before them with seemingly endless possibilities. But one question remained unanswered, leaving reporters wondering if this family was capable of planning and executing such a complex turnaround against one of the city's most powerful businessmen. What other injustices would they be prepared to face? And how many other families like theirs were watching this victory and realizing that perhaps it was time for their own voices to be heard? 6 months later, Richard Blackstone signed personal bankruptcy papers in a modest office downtown. Blackstone Industries had been sold to cover the class action lawsuit settlements. His Beverly Hills mansion, ironically, now housed an educational center run by the Santos family. $340 million in damages, Miguel Santos explained to reporters at the center's opening. Every penny will be invested in education and opportunities for young people from disadvantaged communities. David, now 17, cut the ribbon alongside his mother. The boy who had been humiliated for fixing a cell phone was being accepted into the country's best universities with full scholarships. My son always knew that knowledge is power, said Sao, wearing the lab coat of the new center's director. 15 years of cleaning offices taught me that those who underestimate others based on prejudice always end up missing out on the greatest opportunities. Richard watched the news from his rented apartment, recognizing that he had created his own enemies by treating decent people as disposable. Jennifer Walsh, now working as a corporate diversity consultant, summed it up perfectly: arrogance has a price, and Richard discovered that some debts are unpayable. David proved that the best revenge is not to destroy those who humiliate you. It is to build something so great that their opinion becomes completely irrelevant. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories about how justice, even if delayed, always finds its way to those who never give up fighting for what is right.